Welcome, welcome. Time to talk some Oblivion now that we're moving beyond Morrowind. Now, this is a game that I really enjoy, and I think it's unique in that compared to Morrowind as well as Skyrim, in which in those games, your character has this kind of chosen one trope about it, right? You're the Neverine, you're the Dragonborn. What's really unique about Oblivion is that the story's not really about you, right? Like your job is secondary. You're helping the would-be emperor, fulfill his role in saving Tamriel, essentially. And I kind of like that. That it's a different kind of virtue. It's not the virtue of my task is to save the world, but my task is to save the world by helping this other guy save the world. And I think that requires a different kind of virtue, and I feel like that's something that I appreciate that really separates this out, not just from the other Elder Scrolls games, but really from most role-playing games, right, where you are not the center. And I think that there's something very healthy about that, that your task is to live for something beyond yourself. So that's just kind of my opening thought, but there's a lot more to develop out of that. But I'd love to just hear about your experience with Oblivion. I mean, how long have you been playing, or what stands out? Kind of wherever you want to throw out some initial thoughts here. Let's see, Tyler, you want to take it first?
Sure. So I Oblivion was my first game I played in the Elder Scrolls. Um, I played it I was in high school, so I didn't really have the patience for these kinds of games at that point in time. I was very much into the Halos and the Call of Duties at that time. So this was just like a fun little venture into something else for a bit. But there was something that kind of grabbed me first playing the game in high school. I was like, there's something different about this. Like this is cool. There's something here. But I just never really gave myself kind of the patience to really drive through. I kind of barreled my way through the main quest. I was like, oh, I beat it. There you go. It's done. Without like any other exploration of anything else in the game. And so then later, just kind of after playing Skyrim, and I'm like, oh, these games have so much more to offer. So then you go back and play Oblivion, and it's like, oh, the world opens up. But yeah, it's really just it's iconic in so many ways. I mean, there's so much, as I've kind of posted in the Discord, some of just the memes of like just the goofy dialogue, the quirky, there's so much quirkiness in it, but it's almost charming now going back. And then now just like diving deeper into the actual world of the game for the first time, it's just, yeah, it's just mind blowing. So, anyways.
It's kind of an exceptional story to say that in your first real play, you barrel through the main story. I mean, who gets the main story in a Bethesda game?
Right.
Yeah, it always takes me a long time to eventually find my way over to the main story. But cool. I'm glad that you were able to backtrack and realize what this game has to offer. Cool. Ian, tell us something about your experience with this game.
So, oh golly, my experience with this game was, actually it's kind of funny, Tyler, to your point. So I picked up Oblivion. Well, it was kind of shown to me by a friend, and I picked up Oblivion while I was waiting for Halo 3, actually, to come out. That was kind of my in-between game, between Halos 2 and Halo 3. But that definitely, Oblivion was definitely my obsession. It's probably the Elder Scrolls game I've played the most. That I put they put the most hours into, the one the one I'm most familiar with, all that stuff. It really blew my mind at the time because I had never seen an open world. Personally, I had never seen an open world game before. So, and at that immediate moment, I didn't know that Morrowind existed. That came a little bit later. But it was just it. I was absolutely taken in with the world. I was taken in with every single city. Like every NPC had a name. They had a personality. They had like a daily schedule that they followed. It kind of reminded me of like Majora's Mask in that way. If anyone's I don't know if anyone's played that or knows what I'm talking about. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, where everybody had like all the NPCs had like daily schedules that they followed. Oblivion was just like that. The crime and punishment system, uh, just like there was a lot of depth. Uh, I felt at the time, in Oblivion, such as it was, and in some ways, it still is. It's weird because it's like it feels like there are things that Oblivion does that not even Skyrim does, especially with like the in depth of the NPCs that kind of makes the cities come just that little bit much more alive.
Yeah, it's definitely well, in a sense, it's a step into immersive realism compared to Morrowind, which is, I think, is more. I mean, there's more depth there overall in Morrowind. I think each of these games gets a
Yes.
little bit closer to the surface level, right? But at
Hmm.
the same time, I mean, having things like the immersive schedules and that sort of thing that adds a touch of realism to the game is definitely a step forward. Even if we're getting a little bit more superficial in some areas. Yeah, it's like that meme I posted in the Discord about all the bear quest where for Morrowind you got like this whole journal entry about why you need to go kill these bears. Gets a little bit shorter for Oblivion, and then by the time
Yeah.
we get to Elder Scrolls 6, just bears.
I bet
That's
that's all it is. We got the cinematic trailer. Like how many years has it even been at this point since we got that cinematic
yeah,
trailer?
it's been a while. I don't know.
It's like they're not.
2018.
It's been so long. They're not doing anything, man.
But yeah, so it's yeah, it's definitely it's an immersive experience. I mean, and I remember when it came out, and I was just blown away by the graphics at the time. Which I mean, it's kind of funny looking back at the original Oblivion with the potato heads. Like,
Oh,
looking back, it's not great, but at the
those
time,
faces are so bad. It's really wild because actually, I used to follow like this computer guy, and he was stretching out like the meshes, the textures in the Oblivion game, and I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember the dimensions, but like the terrain had several orders of magnitude more textures than the faces, which I think were like really simple. Like I want to say like the textures for like a rock were like 1,000 by 1,000 or something like that, and then like the faces were like 32 by 32. It was crazy.
Jacob, tell us a little bit about your experience with Oblivion.
Sure. Well, I've always been an RPG adventure kind of guy. My dad used to do pen and paper adventure games that he would write for me to play through and everything. And I actually found Morrowind first because a cousin of mine was playing it on his Xbox, and then I played it later on PC. And then after that, like 2 years later, I found Oblivion. And as much as I loved Morrowind, Oblivion it had so much more. Well, it had the living world aspect. It felt like a living world. Morrowind had the depth, like you said, but it didn't have the. It didn't really feel like an alive world, like I was saying. And I over the years I've created more characters than I can count in that game, and I've done probably every quest at this point. I'd say my favorite thing to do is to just go through the main quest, ironically. And Shivering Isles, of course, is one of the best, expansions of all time, I would say. And yeah, I just, one of the things I love about that game, honestly, is the world, or the aesthetic rather. Um, a lot of people at the time, complained it was generic fantasy and all that, but personally, I thought it was downright gorgeous at the time. even when I even when I was playing on my first laptop that I had, where I couldn't even play with a far draw distance or anything like that. Everything was on bare minimum, and I still only got like 20 FPS. It was awful in hindsight, but I still enjoyed it. But yeah, I love the fact that it's personally, I love the fact that it's more quote unquote generic fantasy, because at the time I was really big into the Lord of the Rings films. Not that I'm not now, obviously I am, uh, but yeah, it felt like me being able to actually live out those fantasies that I always imagined whenever I would watch those movies, and kind of like self insert myself into them. So I guess that's probably the main thing I would have to say about that game. And of course, the DLCs are great too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll be focusing on the DLCs next week. But
Nice.
yeah, Shivering Isles is. I agree. It's my favorite DLC expansion of the whole series. So I definitely look forward to getting to that. But yeah, and I think that there's some common ground here, and that we all recognized, especially at the time, like how immersive this was, how much it was a lived-in universe, and so much of it felt real. And I feel like there are a lot of great worked out quest lines, even side quests. Someone mentioned in the Discord how the Dark Brotherhood, in particular, I think really shines in Oblivion. I don't know if shines is the right word for the Dark Brotherhood, but like it's so creative, and it's interesting. And so you can definitely see their attention to detail that, even in the side quests are to some degree perhaps even more compelling than the main story, as much as the main story does have to offer. And I will say another point of distinction for Oblivion that I didn't really fully appreciate when I was younger, when the game first came out. I just mentioned in the Discord that really historically my go-to character for all these games has been some kind of stealth thief, assassin, villain slash anti-hero type. But going back when I play these games now, I have much more of a moral center. I don't know if I've just developed a better sense of morality in real life or not, but and in Oblivion, like it really does feel rewarding to be a good guy, as your task is to basically fight off the demons and shut the gates to hell. Like it has this like, I don't know, doom-like quality to it, where you are putting the world back into order in a very clear, a very morally, very theologically charged sense. And so that's something that I really appreciate about Oblivion. I feel like in all these games, it feels the most fulfilling to me, at least, to be the good hero. And I don't know. I think that's something I've learned to appreciate more than I once did. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about the main structure of the main story. So, in just as a brief recap, basically the Emperor dies at the beginning. He's assassinated by the Mythic Dawn, and so then that is setting up the stage for the Oblivion Crisis, because it's only when the Septim, and please correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but the Septims in wearing the Amulet of Kings, gifted by Akatosh in time past, that's what is basically holding back the forces of Oblivion, right? And so when the institution of the Septim dynasty is in peril, right? That's when the fabric of the world essentially is exposed to the forces of Oblivion. And I think that it's kind of interesting that in a very like historically grounded sense, it seems to me like a pretty strong conservative position, in the sense of showing us the value of the monarchy, of institutions, right? That it's when the most fundamental institutions of society are at peril, like that's when the world itself is at peril. Like institutions matter, governance matters. And so this is very much focused in on the importance of the person who is in charge, who is thereby representative of the people who are in their charge. It's not a strictly it's not a very democratic kind of story, right? It's everything hinges on the emperor. And so your task is to help to kind of guard the institution. And so I don't know, I find that very interesting, but I would love to hear some of your thoughts, whether they're along those lines or totally different. Like, what would you say is the sort of some of the main themes of Oblivion? And it does not have to directly relate to what I just said.
So, does anybody else want to say anything?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think, broadly speaking, I think you're more or less spot on, Andrew, in your observation with that. It's very like the thing that struck me about this story of Oblivion in particular is that it has a very covenantal like feel to it, where you have like kind of like how like so like God makes his promise with Abraham, right? You have Akatosh making his promise to Saint Alicia, who will become the first emperor. And so long as they they keep the Dragonborn emperors, they keep the Amulet of Kings, which is which is basically this binding to Akatosh essentially. Um, they are free from basically chaos and destruction. And then you even have like this really interesting thing that happens at the end, right? Where spoilers, Martin Septim sacrifices himself by shockingly, he destroys the Amulet of Kings, and he becomes this fiery avatar of Akatosh, fights Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, defeats him, and then basically dies and becomes this statue. And like the statue itself becomes the new kind of like the new covenant, the new barrier. Like there is so where once the sacrifices were required under the Mosaic law, now you have like it's like, oh, now we've moved on from the sacrificial system. We've kind of had this one life-giving sacrifice once and for all that now kind of guarantees the protection of the emperor or the empire, and it kind of like moves on from like you no longer need like an Amulet of Kings. You don't need a constant relighting of the dragon fires. You don't need to make sure that there's this dragonborn emperor. Martin kind of does this perfect work once and for all time to save the empire. And I always found that really striking. There's a very like the more like the more we dig into this, it can be a little more there's more nuance. It can be like a little more complicated than that. But like on its head, Oblivion's main story has a very like Christological bent to it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting and very well said. That and that goes along with why I said it feels like perhaps the most theologically charged game, where it feels right to be a good guy because you are set up in such staunch moral terms, and I appreciate that Christological connection that you brought in here. I think that's really interesting. Does anyone, Tyler, do you have anything to add?
I mean, nothing to add per se, but other than just, yeah, I mean, that connection sounds really interesting. And, just thinking more about you can see it through the pure aesthetic of the game too, where there is a lot of medieval, high fantasy in it. And, even just with the look of the monks and the look of the blades and, all these different features of it, you can really see it leaning into, a more chivalrous time, and so being a knight in this kind of game feels more in line with where it's pushing you. And so playing something else, it does kind of feel like awkward in many ways. But I know we'll kind of keep progressing along the story and get into some of the the villainous themes, the darker themes of it, but from just like the perspective looking at the Christological features of Martin, but also too, yeah, because you look at the way that the emperors over time ruled, it's so messy. And there's always this like constant like just combativeness of what does it mean to be a good emperor in a way? Like you have this figure of Talos, of Tiber Septim, of this like dude who conquered in the most brutal ways. And then on the tail end you have and it is in a sense to be a divine, but then you have this Martin guy who like it comes from nothing, comes from nowhere and in the most humble way too. Like has to go through his own trials and whatever's to get there, and it's such a different picture of what you would see as like the perfect emperor, just in the same way of like looking at, what the Jews in, the Israel expected of their Messiah. They expected this conquering hero, but here comes this, this preacher, this humble guy, and having to be there's a sacrifice there, and that's not what they expected. And
That's
in the same
good.
way, like, what did you expect from Martin? I
That's
expected him
good.
to blow everything up, and now he's the emperor.
Yeah, that is a good continuation of this Christological theme that we've been seeing here. And we see that he is somebody of great strength, but as you're talking about, it's a different kind of strength. This is not a go forth and conquer strength. It's a go forth and conquer evil strength, which requires a different kind of strength. That humble sacrificial service, which is the only kind of strength that is actually going to stand against the forces of hell, which are seeking after a power. You have to be willing to let that power go. That's good. That's good. Do you have anything to add, Jacob or Chris, if you're there?
Yeah, I just was going to add one thing to Tyler nailed it about what I was going to say about the difference between Tiber Septim or Talos and Martin. But something I find extra interesting about that comparison is that when Martin goes to sacrifice himself, he sacrifices himself in the temple of the one, Talos. The temple's roof blows off, which I see could be kind of a parallel to the curtain in the temple being torn when Jesus was on on Golgotha. And it just, when you do look at it that way, it's kind of crazy to see the parallels, whether they were intentional or not. It's kind of cool to interpret it that way for sure, because like you can kind of get a little bit of a, not really, I don't know if it would be a lesson per se, but it can kind of make the game feel a little bit more personal to you and your faith if you interpret it that way. But yeah, that was basically all I was going to add. But
Yeah, I mean, I have no reason to think that the writers were trying to tell a Christian story. At the same time, they're trying to tell a good story that's obviously set in a world inspired by medieval Europe, which obviously is a Christian world. And so, I don't know how much was theologically intentional, but just in telling that kind of story, if you're going to do it well, it's going to have Christological themes built into it, whether you are doing that intentionally or not. It's like as Lewis often says that all good stories echo the ultimate story, the good story, the story of the cosmos, whether they are trying to or not, or Justin Martyr, right? That seeds of the Logos are spread throughout the world, and we, as God's image bearers, can't help but to imbibe that. And so, in our dreams, in our imaginings, even in our myth making, there are these echoes of the true story that are there just because we are part of that story, whether we know it or not. And so again, I think especially when you're explicitly telling a story that's inspired by medieval Christian Europe, those themes are definitely going to be there in a pretty profound way. If they're not, then you're not really being true to your source material. So, yeah, but I think these are excellent things to bring out here. And I was just thinking that as I was looking a little bit into the Amulet of Kings, kind of where it came from, exactly what it is, as is often the case in the Elder Scrolls, there are some conflicting accounts regarding exactly what it is, where it came from. Does it have? Is it made with the blood of Akatosh himself? Is it made with the blood of Lorcan? There are some different takes on that, and I really like the idea that it is totally attached to that it comes from Akatosh and from his own blood. Akatosh being the god of time, who really, by virtue of that identity, I mean, he is what provides stability to the world, which again just continues this these Christological themes, even as Christ is the Word, in whom all things are held together. He is the one that provides stability to what would otherwise be chaos. That's why John begins his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, in arche hen ho logos, which that logos idea is an idea that goes straight back to ancient Greek philosophy, right? Where Heraclitus, this pre-Socratic philosopher, notices that like everything in this world is given over to change. We live in a world that is fundamentally chaos, except there's one thing that doesn't change, and that is the process of change itself. And so while he famously said that you can never step into the same river twice, well, he also recognized, but the river also moves in a consistent, reliable, predictable manner. And so, it's like a word is the smallest form that provides meaning. Well, the word is that which does that for the entire moving cosmos, which is given over to chaos. Well, that's kind of the role that Akatosh serves here. And so I like the idea that it is Akatosh in providing stability that holds off the chaos of the Daedra, which are, very much attached to the chaos of Padme, if you take that back to the source there. So we're back into this order chaos dynamic here. So just another dimension of this Christological analysis that we're throwing out there. Ian, what's something you have from your list?
What is something I have from my list? I've got like 13 tabs open, and there are still some tabs I'm looking for that I'm struggling to find. I guess to your more immediate point. I'm actually I think I love the cohesiveness of like the picture that you're painting, right? With Akatosh and the Amulet of Kings and everything. I am kind of on the side of unfortunately, as far as that goes, I'm kind of on the side of the Amulet of Kings is the blood of Lorcan. There is something really interesting there. Like, so, Michael Kirkbride, he wrote this. He wrote kind of like this fifth era fan fiction, sort of, after he left Bethesda Studios, called Coda, and it's kind of like this. It's kind of like this weird kind of like fifth era end times where Vivek and his partner are kind of running around, well, really just very trippy insanity is happening. It's very weird, typical weird Kirkbride stuff, but there's actually this really interesting pic. I might be misremembering this and getting this completely wrong, but I want to say there was a moment where he meets like Akatosh, and it's kind of like Akatosh and Lorcan have kind of like a Janus thing going on, like where they're kind of like it's kind of like it's kind of like two faces of the same person, where it's like, they see Akatosh, but they also see Lorcan, and even though they're looking at Akatosh, he's got like, a gaping wound in his chest where his heart used to be, like Lorcan is. And I don't know, it's an interesting image that I think about a lot when it comes to Akatosh and kind of like that whole Lorcan dichotomy, whatever. Like there is a story of Elysia in the song of Pelennor, and it's very interesting because like when you read like the Amulet of Kings book, I think it is, it's that story that you talk about. It talks about how Akatosh gives Elysia his blood, basically making her dragonborn, kind of giving, establishing the covenant, and then he gives the Amulet of Kings. But you have it's what's weird about it is if you look at the Song of Pelennor, which is kind of this really quintessential story in the early narrative of the history of the Empire, where at this time there is no empire. You have these Ayleid elves that are enslaving and brutalizing humans and basically anything that isn't elves. And the story kind of recounts how Elysia, which is not her actual name, by the way. Her actual name is lost to time. She's gone by like several different titles, but it's interesting how when she's crying out for mercy, kind of like the slaves in the Hebrew slaves in Egypt, they're crying out to God for mercy and deliverance. When Elysia, she's first introduced as Perif, but when Elysia is crying out for mercy, she's speaking to it says she's speaking to the handmaiden, who is actually Kinnereth or Kine, which in the Nordic pantheon is the wife of Shor. And she's invoking Kine, she's invoking Shazar, who goes missing. And then Kine answers her prayer by sending her kind of her demigod son Morihaus, who's like this man bulb, and then you've got this other knight called Pelennor Whitestrake. But it's really interesting how, like, in the Song of Pelennor, Akatosh doesn't really come into the picture until much later. I don't know. It's an interesting little. It's an interesting little contradiction. I don't know if it's a contradiction. But there's like a hole in the story. We're missing some details. It's not like, we don't have a full picture of what's kind of going on there.
It's complicated whenever we deal with anything in Elder Scrolls lore, because they try to make it realistic in that there's not a straightforward take on exactly what happened. And so, like I said, philosophically, I like the Akatosh stuff, but what would actually happen, I don't know. I don't think we're supposed to really know. What leads you to kind of adopt that sort of account, that Lorcan-centric account?
I've got a poem. It's a very short poem. It's called Kim El Adabal, a ballad. When Akatosh slew Lorcan, he ripped his heart right out, hurled it across Tamriel, and the heart was heard to shout. Red diamond, the heart and soul of men. Red diamond, protect us to the end. The laughing heart sprayed blood afar, a gout on Cyrodiil fell, and like a dart shot to its mark, down in an Iliad well. Red diamond, the heart and soul of men. Red diamond, to protect us to the end. Magic effused the Lorcan blood to crystal red and strong. Then wild elves cut and polished it down to Kim El Adabal.
Well, I mean, if you put it into poetry, then it must be true.
It must be true. It rhymes. It rhymes. It must be true.
That's what I learned from Vivek.
I guess
points if it's a song.
Yeah. So I guess to keep it. As simple as I can. Throughout all of the history of humanity, right, in the context of the Empire, Lorcan is a figure who comes up just again and again and again and again and again. From the mythological stories of them ripping out his heart, and then they can't destroy it, so they shoot it across the sky. It creates Red Mountain. A drop of blood goes into the Iliad well. That becomes the Amulet of Kings. You've got the famous line, "This heart is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other." You have the fact that, like, Tiber Septim himself seems to kind of be like a reincarnation of Shazar. On some level, you can argue that, and there's these popular theories and interpretations that a lot of player characters, not every single one of them, but a lot of player characters are reincarnations of Shazar as well. You've got the famous knight to Oblivion history, Pelennor Whitestrake, who, when he is claimed to be a Shezarene, he apparently had a red diamond in his chest in place of a heart, as the saying goes. And when he was declared to be a Shezarene, he was smothered by moths. That was kind of a strange little thing. You've got Morihaus, the man bull, and Pelennor are constantly referring to each other as Ada, which is, kind of like the word for, god or gods or demigods or, whatever. They refer to each other as family. They refer to each other in like immortal-ish terms. Yeah, I don't think I was 110% prepared to lay this argument out point for point, but my understanding of the Imperial history and the lore has always just kind of, like, again and again and again has kind of taken us back to the Lorcan connection. It doesn't stop Akatosh from being central to everything that's going on, because there's no denying that he is. Especially in Oblivion, especially in Skyrim. In Skyrim he's fighting himself. It's crazy. But that's kind of the unscripted ADHD spiel.
No, I mean that's helpful. Maybe I don't think I fully come to terms with exactly who or what Lorcan is, like what his significance is, or I mean, obviously he is seen as something of a hero to men, um, but I don't know. I don't think I've fully come to terms with like what he is as a an emanation of chaos, right? If you follow his point of origin, um, what I don't know what his value is. I don't know what I don't know if maybe you could elucidate that for me. I mean, like, it, what what's the best way do you think to view Lorcan?
What is the best way to view Lorcan?
That's a super vague question.
It's that's a hard question that Elder Scrolls fans have been debating for decades at this point, to this very day, and I don't know if anybody has a straight answer. So there's a very, very popular theory that, Shazar is, so yeah, he's the hero of men. He's the, he's the champion of men. In that way, there's almost kind of like a Promethean view of him in that sense. There's a theory that he was basically like there's a Plato in the cave theory basically, where all of the other gods are sitting in their cave content to look at the shadows on the wall, and Lorcan was the one who went outside the cave and came back and tried to tell everybody, and then they killed him. That's an interpretation, that's a theory, but it goes along with the idea that Lorcan, basically people say that Lorcan did everything that he did so that men would have a chance to ascend, basically. And everything that's happening in the story and everything that he is doing is all part of basically a divine plan to rescue men and ascend men, and it's like all this very, very like good-natured stuff. On the other hand, you have I was reviewing some material for today. You have some people, and the person in particular that I'm thinking of is the YouTuber I've mentioned before, Kotho, who's got the 7-hour crazy video. But he said something that he pointed out in his video, which I thought was really interesting, because I hear the Lorcan as good guy thing all the time. And he points out we've got three very questionable people that praise Lorcan whenever Lorcan comes up. Like, Vivek praises Lorcan. Let me think. It's Vivek, it's Boethia, and I can't remember the third one. It's brought up basically in the context of Sithis. So you have these three extremely Mankar Cameron. Duh. He's only one of the most important characters in Oblivion. I feel so dumb. But Mankar Cameron, Vivek, and Boethia praise Lorcan in just the most dubious ways. And it's one of those things that kind of makes you stop, and it's a really good point that Kotho's not trying to burst anybody's bubble here. He's just kind of pointing out, this is something that we got to consider. So it's like there doesn't really seem to be an answer to the Lorcan question, and that seems to be kind of the point. I've always kind of looked at Lorcan in the past in fairly positive terms, but at the same time, I've also always been kind of an Aedra stan at the same time too. So I wish I could give you. I wish I could give a more satisfying answer. I feel like in some way or some form, the truth has to lay somewhere in the middle, because within the context of the world of Elder Scrolls and its history, I feel like the elves kind of have a point with their theological worldview, but I don't think, I think the men have their points and their reasoning as well.
My biggest hang up with Lorcan is that, well, it's really my hang up with some of the underlying philosophies of Gnosticism and whatnot that are they're built into the world. And so maybe I just need to get out of my head and get more into the world to assess exactly what his legacy or ongoing influence should be. So maybe that's at least part of it, because he does have definitely a Promethean kind of heroism to him. But the problem is, I don't know that Prometheus is a hero.
It's like one of the. It depends on how you interpret that. Yeah, because I don't like, you can see him as a hero. You can see him as not. It kind of goes both ways.
Right. It kind of comes down to the questions of, okay, are the gods inherently just? Right. That's the broader philosophical question that we have to deal with. And I mean, in the world of the Elder Scrolls, I mean, well, not necessarily. It depends on how we're defining gods, I suppose. But yeah, interesting. To bring it back more specifically to Oblivion, are there any other aspects of the main story that we needed to address?
I do, but I want somebody else to speak first.
Well, I was just going to say one thing about we were talking about the philosophical aspects of Lorcan and all of that. Just real quick, I was just going to say the way I view him is the way, so like if you look at how, you have Anu and Padme, Anu begat Anuiel, Anuiel begat Uriel, and Uriel is the Altmer or the Aldmer perception of Akatosh. I kind of view that on, Lorcan is kind of that on the Padme side. And then also just real quick about I was going to say something about the red diamond imagery. Just very quick thought that probably doesn't lead anywhere, but has anybody ever thought about the possible symbolic mirror of the red diamond imagery with the Sacred Heart of Christ imagery in Catholic mythology? Because, you see that in a lot of art throughout the years, and I'm wondering if maybe that has some sort of parallel. But that was just a quick thought that probably didn't lead anywhere. Yeah,
fair enough. I mean, as far as the Padme Anu stuff, and I think that, again, in the world that we're working with, it definitely does seem like the powers that be capital P powers are operating, especially like in the eternal sense, outside of Mundus, that at that point we're beyond good and evil in the sense that we use it, right? I feel like the Elder Scrolls lore itself is pretty explicit about that once you get outside of this temporal sphere, we're not dealing with the same kind of morality, or maybe even we're not dealing with morality at all. Like, that's something that happens within this sphere. And that is obviously a major contrast with, say, the Christian position that being is fundamentally good because, well, God is, and God is good, right? And so goodness and being go hand in hand. Whereas I don't think you can necessarily say that about the Elder Scrolls metaphysics, that you can't necessarily say that Anu is good and Padme is not, right? They don't necessarily exist in those terms. And I think that once we get that kind of settled, it becomes easier to see Lorcan as a hero, because he is a I don't know, manifestation of a manifestation of Padme, of chaos, and I guess within the Elder Scrolls universe, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so if we're adopting their metaphysics on the broader scale, then once you get down into the narrow scale of how things are appearing in this temporal world, well, now it's not so clear cut as order is good and chaos is bad. And so I guess that leaves room for this agent of potential chaos, right, to be a heroic kind of figure as he manifests himself in this temporal sphere. So that's just my own working through how we're supposed to understand Lorcan in real time.
Yeah, and I guess the way that I see it too is what is needed is movement, and so in a way too, like seeing Lorcan as like this this agent of moving the story along, because there, in many ways, like you can see, I don't know where I heard it, but it was the Empire had gotten stale. And so we need the Mythic Dawn to do something because this is getting pretty stagnant. The people are just kind of, it's almost the idea of the disenchantment. The world is losing enchantment. There's no anything going on. And so now we need a cataclysmic event to really get people bolstered up and back on their track again.
Yeah, and that framing of movement, I think it's important. That the elves aren't fans of Lorkhan because they don't like movement, right? Movement is what got them to where they are now in this devolved sort of state, or this corrupted earthly kind of state. Whereas they see themselves as basically kin of the gods, where in the kind of state of being that they ought to occupy, right? If it weren't for the limitations of this material world of Mundus. And so it's movement that got them down to the state of corruption. Whereas for men, it's movement that gives them opportunity to rise from the earth in the direction of ascension, toward the direction of transcendence. And so it makes sense that this agent of movement would be a patron of men, whereas the elves would not like him very much because he stands for this movement for transition. And I find it kind of interesting that the elves of the Elder Scrolls, they have this longing to hold on to what once was, very much like Tolkien's elves, right? We're going to hold on to what once was. What we don't like is this idea of fading, of things passing away. So there's just interesting connection there.
I also find it interesting how Mankar Cameron himself is an Altmer, but yet he's the forefront of leading Mehrunes Dagon's charge on Tamriel during the game. It's kind of an interesting contradiction there. And, I know he has his motivations and everything, but it's just very interesting how he's part of the very race that wants to return things back to the way they were, while also leading the charge to change Tamriel, Nirn rather, to something completely different. It's kind of just an interesting contradiction there. I'm not sure why, but
there seems to be Mankar Cameron is very very weird. And there seems to be one of the things that's kind of going on with him. So if you know anything about his genealogy, there's actually a book in the game called The Refugee that you can find and read, and it kind of talks about very very briefly kind of the origins of his birth, at least. But if you know anything about Mankar, which you know that he's not even strictly necessarily an Altimer. I mean, he is. He's actually, like, he was born a Bosmer. He was born a wood elf to wood elf parents, and he becomes like an Altmer. And he talks about it in the commentaries of the Mysterium Xarxes that he writes. He speaks very vaguely about his transformation, and there were fans that were also asking Michael Kirkbride, who was the creator and the writer for Mankar Cameron and the commentaries, it's very much like Lessons of Vivek 2.0. The commentaries are. But fans were asking Kirkbride, so why is Cameron an Altmer? Why is he able to read the Amulet of Kings? And the answer that Kirkbride gave basically was he used the Daedric artifact Mehrunes Razor to basically transform his body into an image that he wanted. There's also kind of like the Ayleid theory. One of the weird things about the Ayleids compared to most of their other kin is they were Daedra worshippers, and they were particularly fond of really nasty Daedra, like Dagon and Molag Bel, but also Meridia, who's kind of like a fallen angel of light. Go figure. But they liked the weird, nasty Daedra. And if you notice Mankar Cameron's the pocket world that he creates for himself using the Mysterium Xarxes, It's an image of kind of like a recreation of alien society as it was before it was, destroyed by Elysia in her slave revolt. So there's this really popular theory that what he's actually trying to do is create like an alien revivalism of sorts. That's again, it's a theory. I think it's a compelling theory. Like I don't know how much of a foundation it has to stand on, but there is enough data there to support the idea.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to like just how power could be so seductive, because it's almost like it's a continuation of like this. I will transform myself, I'll transform others, and now I'm going to transform it all. And just this constant building up of power, building up of whatever, and then losing so much. I mean, because there's so much and there's parts and snippets of the commentaries and in his, his powerful speech as you're walking through paradise and all that stuff. And it's just like there's snippets of it. It's like, and then it's like, oh no, because it's just that twisting of what could be true and that just completely losing whatever piece of him, like I said, was that wood elf in the beginning. He's completely lost all of it, and I just find that transformation just really interesting, thinking about this, just what power can do to you. Because in the same way with like Vivek too, where it's just like what power does to you, like what is your mind and what are you doing and what's happening, what is the fruit of what you're doing, and there's nothing good there anymore. It's just
Yeah. Menkar Cameron is very much kind of like, and to Andrew Snyder's point when he was released his video on the 36 sermons of Vivek, and you have kind of like that, that more like postmodern idea of recreating yourself. I would actually say it's kind of like a hyper enlightenment kind of idea, kind of like a hyper individualism that kind of stems from like the Enlightenment movement, of kind of like just kind of like the absolute utter uniqueness of the self, and if you're not happy with that self, then you can completely like mold it and recreate it, even in terms of violence. And all of the imagery that Menkar Cameron uses in his commentaries when speaking of his own transformation and his own coming to enlightenment is actually a very, very violent one. And it's actually one of those things that kind of like, it's one of those things that actually kind of gives more context for what he's doing in his paradise, where he's torturing all of his followers, because he's got the line, he's got like the scripture that he quotes from the Xarxes, where he talks about, the weak will be winnowed, the weak and the timid will be winnowed. And he's torturing all of his followers, not just because he's some evil jerk dude. He absolutely is, but he's got this very, very messed up view and understanding of the six walking ways, the philosophical ideas within the context of the games world on how to achieve enlightenment. And basically, like, I think in particular for him, the walking way that he's trying to follow is the Psijic Endeavor, which I believe it's his own messed up version of the Psijic Endeavor. The Psijic Endeavor, it talks about a lot of things. One of the ideas is basically kind of like, facing pain, suffering, trials, adversity that just kind of like naturally come up in the world as a result of living in like a broken world and coming out the other side. Menkar Cameron seems to be like artificially accelerating that by, you play the game and he's, dunking his followers in paradise and lava and stuff like that. He's, and again, like, he speaks of his own he speaks of his own, like, his own personal enlightenment in like very, very disturbing, violent imagery, and he seems to be forcing that on everybody else. It's a very like he's a very messed up dude.
And ultimately, that Enlightenment individualism, that emphasis on the individual self, and the postmodern, I can just be whatever I want to be. And it's a direct
Hmm.
line, right?
Oh yeah. And
Yeah.
really quick, the thing that I wanted to say to that I
Mhm.
forgot to mention was the thing that he's shilling, the thing that he's promising. After kind of like addling his head trying to read, Mehrunes, crazy book was everything that he's basically shilling in the commentaries is you can reshape your reality. Are you not are you downtrodden? Are you not happy with your lot in life? Are you not happy with who you are? Are you not happy with how your life or how the world has turned out? I am promising you the power to literally shape your own reality. So we were kind of talking in the Discord about like that really kind of that fun line uh, that he dropped about myth kind of being I'll just pull it up here on the actual page. He says once you walk the mythic, it surrenders its power to you. Myth is nothing more than first once, unutterable truth. Ponder this while searching for the fourth key. But that whole thing about myth is nothing more than first once, unutterable truth. And I think I like we were talking about how that seems to be kind of like a very brief and abrupt phrase. But what was the thing that you said again in the Discord, Andrew, after you first read that?
Yeah. What I said, it sounds like he's relating myth to kind of our primordial, like our unconscious desires, right? The first ones, the things that we want without even necessarily consciously recognizing that we want them, right? The things that we're desiring, the things that are moving us. And that right there, I mean, that's an idea you can find in scripture about how we're led by the heart, and the heart's deceitfully wicked, right? We don't really know what it is that we want. Or you can look at this in Carl Jung for sure, where he talks about the unconscious, right? Our unconscious motivations that are pushing us in ways that we can't fully even articulate. Well, this seems to be kind of how he here is using this word myth. Now, what I say that where he goes wrong in potentially a diabolical sense, certainly a self-constraining sense, is when he says that myth is nothing more than first once. I can accept that your first once are somehow tied to myth, but I would say that it's because we fundamentally live in a myth-laden cosmos. Like ultimately, what myth is it's a story that transmits meaning. Like that's really what a myth is in the broadest sense. Even C.S. Lewis says in Myth Became Fact, he says, and I love that this is just a throwaway line he doesn't elaborate on. He just says, "Is not the sky itself a myth?" And then he just kind of moves on without explaining what that means. But the point is, like, we live in a story that is full of meaning, and all the various myths we're talking about, like the ancient Greek and Roman myths or whatever, or just good stories of today, like the reason why they resonate with us, the reason why certain myths have been told again and again and again throughout time, throughout different cultures, is because they're telling us something true, something about the way that reality fundamentally is, something about what human experience fundamentally is. And so a good myth, well, it's a working out of something that's happening internally within the human soul. And so what I would be willing to say is that our first wants are derivative of the myth that is human existence, which at that point, our first wants, our most primordial desires, they're meant to drive us into a broader context beyond ourselves. Whereas he makes it more self-containing, where the myth is what I want, and that's what I'm going to impose upon the world. Rather than how do I discover the true myth, it's I'm going to impose my myth on the world around me, reshaping it accordingly. And so it's a matter of like, where we go in that direction of myth.
Hmm. Yeah, that was very, very good spiel, by the way. The thing that, so I was reading through the commentaries recently, actually, kind of like in preparation for tonight, and when you made your comment, you've expanded on it much more, in a wonderful way. Uh, but the thing that I was kind of looking at it, because it's like, yeah, it's like, because initially you said he seems to cut the thought short, and like I would definitely agree with that on the surface. I was flipping through the pages, and I think in the context, and you touched on this yourself, I think in the context, what it is kind of a throwaway line, but like the larger point that he's trying to make in context of everything else that he is saying is basically he's talking about like your deepest desires, right? With kind of like he's tying on some level he's tying myth with your deepest desires, and basically like kind of what he's saying all throughout this is, well, he's got this crazy idea, that, and again, like for anybody who thought that talking about Lorcan a lot in Oblivion was meandering, it's actually not. It's the core to everything that Menkar Cameron's about. Menkar Cameron is arguing that basically, when he read the Mysterium Xarxes and it fried his brain. Okay, basically, the impression that he took away from it, from what he thought Mehrunes Dagon was trying to say, was that in his mind, the great revelation, the great twist, was that Tamriel was just another plane of Oblivion, and that Lorcan was its Daedric prince, and the Aedra were basically the false pretenders who betrayed and murdered Lorcan so they could take his realm for themselves, excuse me. And that's why Tamriel is a battleground for gods, basically all of the time. And Mehrunes Dagon will deliver Tamriel back to a state in which it is truly meant to be, in which it truly belongs. And he's saying that in doing this, again, coming back to the myth is nothing more than first once part, in doing this, he's basically saying, okay, like, we do this, and yeah, we what I mean when I say this is, we can make the reality you want. We can make your desires become the new reality. That's basically kind of like what he's promising, what he's shilling. I'm just gonna murder you and dip you in lava over and over and over and over again, because that will lead to this enlightenment. I promise, guys. Really.
Yeah, it very much reminds me of in the Screwtape Letters, where we see how all the demons want to basically consume those who are under them, and then they in turn get consumed by those that are above them. And so, when you live in this, well, as Lewis calls it, the lower archy, right? It's opposed to the hierarchy, the lower archy of hell, that ultimately everybody is just out for power. And so what it sounds like enlightenment, what sounds like liberation, is ultimately a way of getting actually more power over those that you're claiming to liberate, right? It's a way of consuming them while promising them a more expansive reality. And so this is exactly what he's doing to his followers. And of course, he in turn he's ultimately, he is consumed. His soul is consumed by the one that he follows, that has promised him such liberation.
Yeah, like, and I don't like, I don't like, I don't think he's like twirling his mustache like, ha ha ha, like, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna like, trick everybody so I can torture them. Like, to reiterate, like, he believes what he's shilling. Like, he thinks the horrible things that he is doing, even to his own followers, is for their own good. Like, that's that's kind of like how deep the rot goes.
Right, and that's, I mean, that's again, bringing it back to Lewis. I mean, he says that one of the most dangerous things you can have is a tyrant who is operating for your good, right? Because, well, I mean, that very rarely is actually going to be for your good, regardless of what their intentions may be.
One of the interesting things actually about this, I mean, when I first listened to all of this when I was a kid, Menkar Cameron's spiel, like, I mean, it just sounded like gibberish. It was like I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't know anything about the lore. I didn't know anything about Lorcan or anything. These were all just names I knew about the 9 divines, of course, because they introduced those in the game right off the bat. So whenever it got to any more gods, it just felt like everything just felt confusing and contradictory, and just kind of it just felt like the story was turning into a just kind of like a muddy, inconsistent mess. And in some ways that is intentional, but in this particular case, it's one of those things, and this is actually something that I think is kind of a failing of the story of Oblivion, which is especially compared to Morrowind. So you were talking about like we were talking about how like in the story of Morrowind, everything is brilliantly woven together. Like the narrative is taking you through the history of it's taking you through the history of Vardenfell. It's taking you through, and why that matters. It's telling you the story of Lorkhan. It's telling you the story of how the Dunmer came to be. It's telling you the story of what happened to the Dunmer, and how who Nerevar was, and the Tribunal, and Dagoth, and all and it's like all of it matters. It's all tied into the culture of Morrowind, and their people and their traditions, the houses, the politics. It's one of those like just like brilliant. It really like Morrowind really is a masterclass in writing interesting lore that is relevant to everything that is going on, and all of the story's guideposts make sure you pass through every single one of those major beats so that you get all of it and you understand how everything makes sense. And Oblivion opts for a much more simple approach, which is, as far as the main story goes, which is you're the Doom guy, and everything kind of falls away at the expense of, now being the Doom guy in Oblivion is awesome, but it comes at kind of like the expense of just the depth and the richness of the Elder Scrolls world, because the Empire's history, lore, culture, philosophy, theology, like it's all there. It's all fantastic and brilliant. It's just it's not really put forefront in the story at all. And especially if you can, certainly not to the degree of that of Morrowind. And if you put it next to Morrowind, it almost feels non-existent. So you're being the Doom guy, and then all of a sudden you meet this Manker Cameron guy who is Vivek 2.0, and he's got the commentaries, which is the 36 Lessons 2.0. And it comes across to the player as just absolute nonsense, and all of just kind of like the weight and the significance of the information that's being presented to you is something that's just going to be lost on like 90% of Oblivion players, that weren't coming from Morrowind and have like a deep, intimate relationship with the Morrowind game. And I think there's something. I think that's a shame. I think it's a shame that we don't get a sense of the depth and the weirdness of the Empire in the same way that we got a sense of the depth and the weirdness of the people of Vardenfell, and how it all comes back to Lorkhan.
Yeah, I think that was a really good analysis. And that's in large part what I meant when I said earlier on that each of these games gets a little bit more superficial, right? Where you're not quite as immersed in the deep lore of the world that you get in Morrowind. I mean, there's some of that in Oblivion. I would argue there's even less of that in Skyrim. In Oblivion, I feel like the highlight is just the experience of being the Doom guy, but you are missing that depth of lore being interwoven in the things that you're doing. Is there anything else from Oblivion that hasn't been mentioned, or that you feel like we should develop further in this conversation from anybody?
Well, just going back to what we were talking about with the chivalry aspect and the medieval aspect, if the idea of the player, of course, being the Doom guy, as you guys said, or a knight or whatever, that's of course the central theme of the game. But I also find it interesting how when you, at the end of the game, if you don't do all of the quests to help close the Oblivion gates outside of the cities, you don't really get a whole lot of help at the Battle of Bruma. And even the Imperial Chancellor himself, he refuses help because he's got too many things on his plate outside in the provinces and everything like that. And I think that that's also just going back to the whole theme of being very chivalrous and everything. It kind of incentivizes the player to do those quests because it's not just a matter of having a few NPCs that get killed within the first 5 minutes. It's more about, getting that sensation of actually being that guy that goes out and is the chivalrous knight trying to help, protect the entirety of Cyrodiil itself, and not just going through the quest to do the quest. I don't know if I made any sense with what I was just saying there.
Yeah, it makes sense. It is a good point that taking the time to fulfill your role as hero and to do service to others and ultimately makes you stronger. And I think that there's a very simple, straightforward lesson to be taken out of that. As I tell my 4-year-olds, like, if you want good friends, you need to be a good friend, right? It's that simple kind of idea that service to others is ultimately going to make you stronger because, well, now you have more powerful people around you who are going to be there for you as you've been there for them. So very simple lesson, but profound one nonetheless.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see that conflicting with Mankar's whole thing, where it's like you see the service of the hero of Cyrodiil, how he's just going around doing stuff and helping people out, having a good time. Yeah, unless you go down the Dark Brotherhood, and then things get a little shady at that point. But it's all right. But just seeing the inherent selfishness of what Mankar is trying to achieve, and just that brutalist transhumanism, the arc that he goes on, and then it's just and because bringing up that ultimate moment of the Battle of Bruma it's extremely satisfying, and unfortunately limited by the technology of the time. Just imagining what it could be built these days, of seeing the different guardsmen and heroes of the various cities coming together to do this. And even just like hearing Martin's speech at that point, like it's having him becoming the hero at that point is also just a really cool storytelling aspect of it, that you see this once again, the two hero and the villain differences, and it's a good moment.
Yeah, and if you think about it, of course, Martin had kind of a troubled past with the Daedric cults and everything, so it kind of ties in as a full circle moment, kind of not really a redemption per se, but it's him coming through the things that he suffered through and struggled with to become the leader that he was supposed to be. And then, like you said, it ties in with Mankar Cameron, who, did all he did and had a very warped perception of, everything he was doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good foil. And I don't want to cut anyone off. Is there anything else from this game that anyone wanted to mention?
So there is, I know we were talking about DLC next week. There's one DLC, actually, that I want to talk about.
Is it horse armor?
How did he know? How did he? No. It ties in with everybody else was saying about knightly virtue. Knights of the Nine. Really short DLC. Shockingly important one. The big thing about the Knights of the Nine DLC is that it, basically is kind of like one of our first expansive, in-depth looks at the early history of the Empire and how it was formed and how it came to be. Because we get the story of Saint Alicia, we get the story of her champion, Elenil Whitestrake, the Starbound Knight, the Star Maid Knight, with the red diamond in his chest. I wonder what that red diamond could be. You've got, Mora House the Bull, and basically kind of like, and the Song of Pelennor is basically this story of basically a Doom guy, right? Pelennor is his own Dune guy who runs across Cyrodiil, ripping and tearing elven slavers to shreds, and also sometimes Khajiit because they have pointy ears, so they must be elves, right? There's actually some parts of the story that are very brutal and grim and not terribly knightly, like so much so that Alesia has to make intercession to the gods, like for forgiveness, and then Pelennor has to atone whenever he has like his kind of fits of rip and tear madness. But it gives you kind of like that story and that history of kind of where the Empire came from, and you get this fun little quest of you basically have to you're collecting all of the pieces of the armor, and as you're doing it, Pelennal's armor, excuse me, and as you're doing it, you are completing like all of these really cool, like, you're basically going on this grail like quest of knightly virtues, and each god has got like, each of the Aedra that you kind of go on pilgrimage for has like a different kind of knightly virtue that you have to do in order to get that piece of armor. There's a lot about the Knights of the Nine that is very Arthurian in that way, and it kind of it commits wholesale to the to the knightly idea. And just as Saint Alesia is kind of the person who's making the covenant with Akatosh, and she's the one who kind of forms the empire, and Pelennor is her champion, you have this really interesting parallel or echo where Martin is the one who's kind of like bringing the empire back from the brink of destruction, and you have the champion of Cyrodiil, who is her champion, her advocate, or his advocate, who, excuse me, I'm getting the characters mixed up. You're fighting in Martin's name, just as Pelennor is fighting in Alesia's name. And then just as Akatosh gives Alesia the covenant, Martin fulfills the covenant, like we talked about earlier. And it's one of those things where, like, the story and the history behind it is so shocking to me. It's shocking to me that because in my opinion, this shouldn't have just been a DLC. This should have been woven into the main story, because there's an element to this that it's got a little bit of that Morrowind element, where the Nerevarine is going on the pilgrimages and taking the trials, and kind of like learning the history, and Knights of the Nine is kind of like a weird little microcosm like that, that's deeply woven and tied to the Amulet of Kings, the Covenant, the Empire, Alesia, all of it, like in a way that's just like kind of weirdly not present in the main story of Oblivion. Yeah. And I think it's a crying shame that, like, because I honestly think that, like, those two stories should have been synthesized into one.
Yeah, because in a way, it's a more fulfilling and deeper Aid for Bruma, where you're doing a very similar thing, going and doing these different tasks, which Aid for Bruma is go to place, close gate. All right, I'll help you now. Whereas this is it's just so much more depth to it, where you're in the various quests that you're doing, you're sacrificing yourself, you're giving yourself up, you're taking on diseases, you're whatever, and there's so much more to that of building a champion than go close gate, counts happy, let's do this thing.
Right.
Yeah, I was just thinking about. Sorry, sir.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking about one of the quests. I mean, they all have like a neat little theme to them. One of the quests for collecting one of the armor pieces, there is this young man, this squire, who, like, he's basically lame in the temple. Like he's kind of like paralyzed. He can't move. Like he can barely lift his arms to help himself. And it's I can't remember. Like, it's been a hot second since I've done the quest. I can't remember exactly why he had his curse, his affliction, but I know he was trying to get one of the one of the armor pieces for himself because he attempted to take on the pilgrimage and he failed in some way. But what's really cool is that you can kind of you do like this knightly virtue of self-sacrifice where you take the young man's curse on yourself, and it like affects your stats, like it affects your fatigue and your strength and your speed and all of that. And so you take on the young man's suffering, and in doing so, that makes you worthy to collect the piece of armor.
It's a very much a Christian knightly activity there of literally bearing his disease, that he might be free and that you in turn, can be virtuous. And that itself is its own strength that comes with rewards, right? It's when you empty yourself in the right ways that you actually become more full, more expansive, better equipped for what lays before you. So yeah, that DLC is definitely a very much a hero's journey that is largely missing from the Oblivion, but fits very well within Oblivion, as you were saying, as it builds you up into the kind of hero that is fit to storm the gates of hell, so to speak. And yeah, so yeah, totally agree with that. And also, just aesthetically, you get some cool stuff.
I noticed earlier, Christopher unmuted his microphone. When you asked if anybody had something to say, Christopher unmuted his microphone and then muted it back. I was wondering if he had something he wanted to say.
No, it's just been kind of a late night with kids and stuff like that, so I've just been trying to not be a distraction.
But... You're well overdue for your turn to speak, good sir. We would love to hear what you have to say about Oblivion.
It's been a good amount of time stuck in a painting and on the Shivering Isles. That's what I remember.
fair enough.
That painting quest is so good.
That's a good one.
It was so trippy when the shaders just change on you and you're like all of a sudden like, what on earth?
I love what they did with that in the remastered. They put like a painted like rasterization filter like
nice.
over the world, like so like in the original game, like in the original version of the game, it's just kind of like the textures of the grass and the trees and everything. In the remastered, they actually put like this painted filter over everything, and it's really simple, but I think it works. It looks good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the remaster. It's just a beautiful work. Man, I desperately hope that one day they get there with Morrowind. All right.
We can hope.
We can hope. All right.
Arena and Redguard as well.
Yeah. Has anyone here played the those games, the first and second ones?
I have, but I haven't finished either of them. I've gotten pretty far in Daggerfall though. The best way to play Daggerfall in particular is Daggerfall Unity, because you can get all sorts of mods that they don't. It doesn't make the game look by today's standards great, but it does make it look much better compared to the original, and it just runs better on modern systems. I believe there's a similar project in the works for Arena and Redguard. And then for Morrowind, you can actually get Open Morrowind, which allows you to add a bunch of extra, fixes and mods and stuff. So, they're not official remasters, but you can kind of get there with, player-made mods and everything.
Yeah, and I've seen people make Morrowind look pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, well, cool. I enjoyed this talk of Oblivion. Like I said, I'm really going to try to do my homework and be prepared next time as we get to Shivering Isles, which is, as I said, it is my favorite expansion of the whole run. So I look forward to talking some Order of Chaos some more, some Sheogorath and Jiglag stuff. So that'll be fun. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it there for now.
Have a good one.
Take care.